He's 5'2" and he's 6'4". He fights with missiles and with spears. He's all of 31 and he's only 17. He's been a soldier for 1,000 years. He's a Catholic.
This reporter, Sam Melton, White Eagle, I'm back with you. We have another Just Say No's news update. Sam Melton here, your fellow reporter. And the Electronic Intifada. We're glad you are back with us. We got a great show waiting for you. Your mediator and reporter, Sam Melton, White Eagle, I'm with you again. And we're getting ready for another great show of Just Say.
I think everything in a war is kind of messes you up.
It is rare to hear Israeli soldiers speak openly about their time in Gaza. But after 3 tours of duty, this reservist says his conscience won't let him stay silent.
Every commander can choose for himself what he does, so it's kind of like Wild West. And so some commanders can really decide to do war crimes and do bad things and like don't have very consequences of that.
He agreed to talk on condition of anonymity, fearing he could be labelled a traitor or ostracised at home. These photos were taken while he was serving in Gaza, where he was stationed in the homes of displaced Palestinians.
I think you can't be in this scenario for so long and not like normalize it and not you lose your mind and then killing is more and more normalized and you can't see the problem in it.
He was first called up on October the 8th, the day after the Hamas terror attack. And it didn't take long before he had serious concerns about how the war was being fought.
There was a building near our territory that Gaza citizens tried for a few days. They came there trying to steal like metals and solar panels and stuff like that, so they could sell it and have some money. Like for sure there were no terrorists over there. But because it was like in the territory that they are not supposed to be in, and it also varied between days, but some days they decided to shoot them.
During his deployments, he was stationed in what's known as the Netzarim Corridor, a key Israeli military zone created during the war that cuts across central Gaza, dividing the territory into north and south, giving the IDF greater control.
They don't really talk to you about civilians that may come to your place. Like I was in the Netzarim road, and they say, if someone comes to here, it means that he knows he shouldn't be there, and if he still comes, it means he's a terrorist. But this is like what they tell you, but I don't really think it's true. They might be shot, they might be captured. Really depends on like the day, the mood of the commander.
So what would be the reaction from soldiers when they killed a civilian?
I think a lot of them really feel like they did something good. Because I think the core of it, that in their mind, these people aren't innocent.
When people have been shot and killed, were they just left where they were?
Usually, yes.
We put the allegations of arbitrary killings in the Netzarim corridor area to the Israeli military. They told us the IDF operates in strict accordance with its rules of engagement and international law, taking feasible precautions to mitigate civilian harm. The IDF operates against military targets and objectives and does not target civilians or civilian objects. It went on. In order to mitigate harm to the civilian population, the IDF issues evacuation warnings to the civilian population and requests it temporarily evacuate certain areas of intense fighting for its safety. The IDF continuously informs the civilian population of any changes. Reports and complaints regarding the violation of international law by the IDF are transferred to the relevant authorities responsible for examining exceptional incidents that occurred during the war. This is just one soldier's account. He says he's speaking out now out of moral duty.
Kind of feel like I took part of something bad, and so I think it's like I need to counter it with something good that I do. And I hope that by speaking of it, it can change like how things are being done. And I think a lot of people, if they knew exactly what's happening, they wouldn't. It wouldn't go down very good for them, and they won't agree with it.
Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
We've published many features in the last week, but today we're highlighting excerpts from The Closer the Yellow Line, the Closer Our Displacement by Hassan Harzallah, writing from Gaza. He writes about not being able to fall asleep on a night in early June because of the incessant drones buzzing over his displacement tent in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. The sound of the drones is then drowned out by another, more terrifying sound, tank treads, inching closer to where they were sheltering. Hassan writes, quote, "My brother Mohammed didn't go back to sleep, and all my attempts to convince him to do so were in vain, because the sound of tanks kept roaring from a distance. We both stayed awake, listening apprehensively before dozing off into a fitful sleep. When I woke up at sunrise, news had spread across the camp about the new yellow-painted concrete blocks now present in Al Shakshuk area near our camp, marking a new expansion of the Israeli military zone. Just the day before, other displaced people from a nearby camp had to flee as those yellow markers were placed closer to their residence. When a military zone moves overnight to just a few kilometers closer from where you are living, the distance between yourself and the danger becomes real. This danger, whether from shelling or random gunfire or just proximity to the Israeli army, is when you start to wonder if you will be forced to flee yet again. Within a few hours, all the conversations in our camp were about the Israeli yellow line. I hadn't seen this yellow line in person, but I saw its effects on people's conversations. 9 months after the pseudo-ceasefire, Israel has continued to expand its military control inside the Gaza Strip. On May 28th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directed the army to seize 70% of the Gaza Strip, which the army seems to have achieved. This means that Palestinians cannot access about 2/3 of Gaza and are being pushed into a very small area because of these yellow concrete blocks. The conversations were contagious. I started thinking whether our tent would be far enough from that danger and whether we needed to relocate or not. My family and I lived those initial days in constant fear from the frequent random tank gunfire, but we remained where we were and did not move our tent since there was no place to go. 2 days later, after midnight, my phone screen lit up. My friend Ahmed was calling. Ahmed Asfour is 30 years old, and before the genocide, he worked as a beekeeper and farmer on his small farm in eastern Khan Yunis. I don't know where to go, he told me. We were forced to flee from our tent due to the mass bombing and the approaching Israeli military. I don't know where to go. Can I come and stay with you until dawn? Ahmed asked. I spoke about this to my father, who instantly welcomed Ahmed and his family to our tent. After around an hour, Ahmed came with his wife, brother, and his ill mother. His family spent the night at my siblings' tent while Ahmed stayed at my tent. After he pulled himself together, he told me how he and his family were sleeping in their tent when, around 12:30 a.m., a big explosion shook the area and everything turned red. Children were running, mothers were screaming, and no one understood what was happening, he told me. Ahmed and his family fled the tent with whatever they could grab. We had been forced to leave our homes long ago, he told me with frustration, and today we were forced to leave even the displacement camp. Despite their camp now being a dangerous place, Ahmed took his family and returned because they have no alternatives. I check up on Ahmed regularly, and he's afraid of another round of displacement, just like the night when he called me. I share Ahmed's worries, as do my family and our neighbors in the camp. Every day, the same conversations of getting displaced again because of the Israeli yellow line are circulating in the camp. As long as Israel keeps expanding its invisible yellow line, there is no guarantee that the place I am living in now, the tent, may remain tomorrow. The yellow line is not just an arbitrary marking on the map. It is a new way to measure the distance between our tent and new rounds of displacement. Those are excerpts from The Closer the Yellow Line, the Closer Our Displacement by Hassan Harzallah, writing from Gaza. Read more on electronicintifada.net. We've published many features in the last week, but today we're highlighting excerpts from Danger is Never Distant in Gaza's Orange Zone by Donya Ahmed Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza. Since the genocide began, Donya writes, I have kept a diary of my countless displacements, but after the first 10 moves, the entries all seemed pointless and repetitive. October 11th, 2023. Moved to a UN school after Israeli explosions shook our home. December 5th, 2023. Moved to Rafah. Sniper was meters away from the UN school. June 13th, 2025. Moved to Al-Mawasi after Israeli forces launched another ground invasion of Khan Yunis. Weather was hot. Transportation unavailable due to lack of fuel. In those previous displacements, we've been forced to leave rented homes and apartments after following evacuation orders, sometimes leaving everything behind. But with this latest displacement, there was no evacuation order, no immediate threat. The owners of the apartment we were renting wanted to sell it. My family and I had lived in this apartment in Western Khan Yunis at the Al-Nam Sawi Towers for nearly a year. From the 5th floor balcony of the apartment, we had a view of the backside of the Nasser Medical Complex, where we could see the funerals of martyrs and hear the sirens of ambulances following every explosion from Israeli bombs. As a medical student, the location was convenient, as I didn't have to walk far to the trainings and workshops held at Nasser, always packed with students, some of us sitting two to a chair. At one workshop, we learned how to stitch up wounds. We didn't have enough stitching kits, so we shared, and I later practiced at home. Our move-out date approached, and we still hadn't found a new place to live. For weeks, every member of my family joined in the search. We asked residents and questioned shop owners about potential homes. We also called friends for help and looked on Facebook pages, but to no avail. Finally, we decided to look further afield. A friend of my brother Hassan told us about a place near the Abu Hamid roundabout in Khan Yunis. The owners of the place had been his neighbors before the genocide. Yet there was one problem. The home was located in the so-called Orange Zone, an area that is adjacent to the occupation's yellow line. The Orange Line has been drawn up this year amid Israeli moves to increase the proportion of Gaza which it fully controls. On May 29th, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, announced that he had instructed the military to expand its direct occupation so that it covers 70% of Gaza's territory. Everything behind the yellow line, homes, agricultural land, and everything in between, is off limits to us. Still, we had no choice. We had to be out of the house. We immediately got to work preparing for the move. Opposite our new home, a 3-story apartment building, is a small supermarket and a little farther ahead is a prayer tent. On all other sides are ruined houses and piles of rubble. Our new house did not seem entirely like a house. To be more precise, it was a collection of concrete columns enclosed mostly by tarps instead of walls. My brother Hassan had repaired some of the walls, though they were still damaged. Inside was a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a balcony that slanted more than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Anyone standing on it would be likely to fall from the second floor to the ground. That first night, my mind traced over my worst memories of the genocide, such as when an occupation sniper was near our home in the Al Amal neighborhood in Khan Yunis, and we were forced to avoid windows to crawl on the floor. Then I thought about the time a special forces unit entered the Al-Shabura camp in Rafah at the beginning of 2024, and the quadcopters hovered low and targeted anyone who moved. My mind considered all these scenarios as if helping me plan for them. How would I respond if anything like that happened tonight? I messaged my close friend Bara. I feel like there are people under the rubble surrounding me from all sides. She replied that I wasn't just feeling that, and that certainly people were under the rubble. I fell asleep wondering about the people under the rubble. Did they live for a long time under the rubble? Did they suffer? Had their calls to rescuers gone unheard? I hoped that one day they could be buried. We have now been in the house for over a month. The water truck comes twice a week. People line up and wait for its arrival. From there, hoses extend from the tanks on the truck and we fill our containers. Obtaining drinking water is a separate ordeal. We pump water from our 1,000-liter rooftop tank, which lasts us for about 3 or 4 days. For bread, we have to go to the city center to buy it because there is no bakery in the area. Adjusting to the new home hasn't been easy. There is no stable internet connection in the area, and we are still making repairs to the house, as it has no proper water or sewage system. Our most recent improvement involved partitioning off a space with a nylon curtain for my brothers from the main living area. Quadcopters approach the neighborhood daily, morning and evening, to film and survey the area. Yet I have grown to feel more comfortable in the house now, since, safety-wise, there is no truly safe place in Gaza. Those are excerpts from Danger is Never Distant in Gaza's Orange Zone by Donya Ahmad Abu Sitta, writing from Gaza. Read more on electronicintifada.net.
The Middle East is in flames. Britain has been dragged into an illegal war, the aims of which are entirely unclear. It's a war of choice, and the man who chose it is Benjamin Netanyahu. Why, yet again, is the West dancing to Israel's tune? I've made a number of videos exposing Israeli crimes. This one is different. It's directed at conservatives and people generally who support the state of Israel. I believe our indulgence of Israel is not just morally wrong, it's against the interests of the US and the UK, and ultimately against the interests of Israel itself. It is leading us all to disaster. Palestine is the place you come thundering, crashing into the buffers, the limits of the Western liberal moral imagination. The tragedy and complexity of Israel is that it's both a product of the most unspeakable racism and a cause of it. Zionism was born from the suffering of Jewish people in Europe, culminating in the Holocaust, from a desire for a safe haven, a territory where Jews would for once be the hosts and not the eternal guests. It was framed as a return to a historic biblical homeland, and for its supporters, these two factors give it an entirely different complexion morally from other enterprises where predominantly European populations have settled far-flung parts of the world. There's no doubt that the Zionist dream has enormous emotional power. The problem, of course, is the other side of the equation, the people it was inflicted upon, the Palestinians, whose experience of dispossession and subjugation was no different from that of countless other peoples subjected to European colonialism. In fact, arguably, it's been considerably worse than many, precisely because of the license and indulgence granted to the Israeli state. Let's lay out the bald indisputable facts. In 1948, more than 80% of the Palestinian population of what became Israel fled their homes. Now, if you want to believe this was not an act of deliberate ethnic cleansing, fine. What's undeniable is that they were never allowed to return. In 1947, they were there. In 1949, they were not. The granting of the vote to that small fragment of the Palestinian population that remained provided a democratic fig leaf for the new state, one that was blown away once the Israelis occupied Gaza and the West Bank in 1967. There, Palestinians have no right to vote for the political entity, the State of Israel, that controls their lives. Jewish settlers, on the other hand, occupying the same territory, do. Even in East Jerusalem, which, as far as the Israeli government is concerned, has been formally annexed to Israel, Palestinians cannot vote. Political rights depend upon ethnicity. That is not democracy. Israel is, and has always been, a state whose defining feature is that it's structured to ensure the domination of one ethnicity over another. What else does the term a Jewish state mean? This is the elephant in the room, the simple, blindingly obvious, undeniable fact that the Western political media class has decided that we must never mention or acknowledge, despite the fact that all of the world's leading human rights organizations, including the Israeli NGO B'Tselem, have denounced Israel as an apartheid state. Now, scour the history of the modern world. No people has ever resigned itself to being second-class citizens in their own country. Spend just 10 minutes at a checkpoint in the West Bank and you get it. The disfiguring dehumanization, the humiliation of elderly men and women forced to stand in the sun for hours waiting for 18-year-olds to search them, the brutalization of young men in particular, the daily control of rage that is the lot of every Palestinian. It is simply emotionally, psychologically intolerable. Yes, you'll have periods of calm as successive generations are bludgeoned into submission. But ultimately, the spirit of resistance will always flare up again because it is human nature for it to do so. Now, of course, there are countries where settler colonial projects have succeeded and produced stable, prosperous nations. The United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, but all succeeded only because demographic catastrophe was inflicted upon the indigenous population. They effectively became entirely different countries through a combination of disease and genocide. And disease isn't going to do the job for the Israelis. Let's imagine a best-case scenario from a Zionist perspective. At present, despite almost 80 years of expulsion and oppression, 50% of the population between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea is still Palestinian. Perhaps the Israelis will succeed in encouraging, and that's very much a euphemism, sufficient numbers of Palestinians to emigrate, that a solid Jewish majority is assured, that they cease to be South Africa and become Australia. Palestinians might be reduced to an exotic remnant, providing cultural colour, selling souvenirs to tourists in the old city of Jerusalem, in Nablus, in Hebron. Perhaps Israel will somehow veer back from what at present appears to be its trajectory towards what can only be called theocratic fascism, enabling its Western supporters to maintain the illusion, in that tired old phrase, that Israel is the only democracy in the region. But Israel isn't Australia. Just look at where it is, a tiny country in the heart of the Middle East, squatting on top of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the significance of which is never grasped in the West, never integrated into the Middle East, but apart from it. A country defined by hostility towards, indeed contempt, for the history, the religion, and the culture of the people around it. And if you don't think Israel is a society rooted in contempt for its neighbours, you haven't spent time there, particularly in the West Bank, with your eyes and your ears open. Does that really sound like a healthy, tenable, long-term solution? What's the alternative? It's actually remarkably simple. It's the same as in all settler colonial countries, the granting of full civil, political and human rights to all of its inhabitants. One-state solution, two-state solution. That's something for the people themselves to decide. It all becomes much less intractable once the requirement of ethnic domination is removed. For Palestinians, this would require them to live in peace and harmony alongside people who have brutalized and humiliated them for almost 80 years. And yes, there are Palestinians who yearn for a return to the Palestine of their grandparents and great-grandparents. Given what's happened to them since, who can blame them? But in my experience of Palestinians, and this includes those in and around Hamas, the vast majority would bite your hand off for simple equality. Study the history dispassionately, analytically. In practice, whatever the defiant rhetoric, once you enter serious negotiations, Palestinians have always shown themselves ready to compromise, almost pathetically so. Yasser Arafat in the 1990s settled for far, far less than equality. The problem is on the other side. Let's be clear. Equality, the granting of full civil, political and human rights to everyone, means the death of the dream of a Jewish state. Yes, Israel would remain a land containing large numbers of Jews, quite possibly a majority, but ethnic primacy, domination, would no longer be guaranteed. And for all we attempt to obfuscate the fact, that has always, in practice, been the core requirement of Zionism. The law of return, the right of any Jew anywhere in the world to go and live in Israel, could be retained, but it would have to be accompanied by a right of return for Palestinians. To say people of one ethnicity can move to Israel on the basis of a 2,000-year-old biblical connection, but those of another ethnicity, driven from their homes just 80 years ago, cannot, is patently, self-evidently racist and morally untenable. Just think of what Israel could be with its coastline and unique historical sites, the epicenter of the world's three great monotheistic religions. It could become a monument to the human capacity for reconciliation and coexistence. And from a Western perspective, just imagine a world where we don't find ourselves in a state of perpetual antagonism towards the world's 2 billion plus Muslims, where we don't find ourselves endlessly having to ally with dictators and monarchies in the Middle East, because we know that as soon as those countries have governments that reflect the will of their people, there will be no more cynical alliances with Israel. A world where we are not eternally morally compromised by our support for a state the vast majority of the world can see is racist, even if we cannot. Yes, America might lose its aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean. Yes, perhaps the CIA-Mossad relationship might not be quite what it was, the deep state connections. But then, without Zionism, how much would we need these things? And in any case, no one's going to stop the Americans placing an actual aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean. The idea that America's capacity to project power in the region depends on Israel is absurd. A peculiarity of the alliance with Israel was always that we managed to pick the one country in the region that has no significant natural resources. Again, apply rational, dispassionate analysis. What does America actually get in return for the billions of dollars it pours down the throat of the Israeli state? What's the cost-benefit analysis? The alternative is decades, possibly centuries, of brutal repression and Western complicity in that repression. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich may revel in such a prospect. But is that really what the bulk of Israel's supporters in the West want? Is it really what Israelis want? In the words of the great Desmond Tutu, oppressing people makes you miserable. When you dehumanize others, you dehumanize yourselves. It's a horrible way to live. To psychologically sustain it, you have to close off the best part of yourself. Look at this photo. A woman holds up a noose and a lethal injection, celebrating Israeli plans to introduce the death penalty for Palestinians. Her husband holds a gun labeled with the word occupation, a plane labeled with the word expulsion, and a house labeled settlement. This woman is not some fringe extremist. This grinning, leering spectre is the deputy speaker of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. This is what oppression does to the oppressor. It demeans and it disfigures. Is this really part of our Western civilization, something we want to be defending and justifying? And if that moral, spiritual argument carries no weight, there is a colder calculation. The present status quo, where less than 8 million Jewish Israelis are able to dictate terms to 500 million Arabs, not to mention almost 100 million Iranians, is a bizarre aberration. It is a balance of power that cannot possibly endure. When and how the system of ethnic supremacy in the Eastern Mediterranean comes to an end is impossible to foresee, but end it will. And when it does, the Israelis and those who've indulged them for so long may well rue the fact they never learned to live as neighbours rather than overlords. Mainstream media never analyses or questions the fundamentals of the Western relationship with Israel. It falls on independent media to really pick apart what's going on there, and to look at it in depth and to question the basic assumptions that underlie it. On this issue, more than any other, we need independent media, and I would encourage you.
I want to bring you some breaking news coming from the occupied West Bank. Dozens of settlers protected by Israeli forces are attacking Palestinian residents in the fields of Al-Mughir village. This is just northeast of Ramallah. Apparently, they've been firing tear gas at them while they were plowing their land. It does come against this backdrop of Israeli authorities documenting a 63% rise in attacks by Jewish settlers against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in the first half of this year. Israeli security bodies classify such attacks as nationalistic crimes and terrorism, according to media, but very few people get actually persecuted. Let's get over to Ramallah itself. Noor Ordeh joining us live on the telephone. And, well, Noor, can you tell us more about what's actually ongoing?
Well, Al-Mughir is a town that has been at the heart of Israeli settler violence and attacks, repeated attacks by Israeli settlers, plowing the land. The Israeli army has complemented this assault by also razing large parts of the agricultural areas there, hundreds of olive trees as well. And this attack is in that context. I remember a few days ago, we were talking to residents of Al-Mughir, asking them about, how much land they have left to plant. And they said the only thing that we now have left are the backyards of our homes. The settler attacks, of course, are usually coincide with either the construction of an illegal settlement outpost or the planned expansion of such an outpost. And we see that repeating over and over again. Of course, there is a military gate that cages in Al-Mughir at the behest of the Israeli army. So this area becomes inaccessible to the outside world. Residents have to plan whether they want to leave the town or not because they may not be able to return. And that's the kind of atmosphere that is created by this combination of Israeli settler attacks and the Israeli army keeping the town completely under lockdown on many days and protecting the settlers while they do these attacks. And of course, we're seeing this repeat across the occupied West Bank, in the south, in Hebron, in the Nablus area, but even in the north, in Jenin, where there are fewer Israeli settlers in numbers, and now an unprecedented number of outposts being set up throughout that district.
And Noor, I mean, it does come against this backdrop as we have essentially an election campaign going on, and the main protagonists, are trying to outright wing themselves. So there's no incentive to stop this from the politicians.
Absolutely. There is no incentive. And this Israeli government's policy is to go after Palestinian presence in the rural areas, in what is called as Area C, which is 60% of the occupied West Bank, where Israel has total control, security and civilian control, where it decides whether Palestinians can build a home, can dig a water well, can access their land. And the campaign is to root out what the Israeli government calls illegal Palestinian presence in the occupied West Bank, which is a Palestinian territory. Who is that territory going to? Well, it's going to the Israeli settlers, whether in settlements that are there, established, recognized, and expanding, or in outposts that are being set up in areas on hilltops that then require being connected to settlements and taking over more land. So this is not a way or in disconnection of Israeli government policy, and there is most definitely an election campaign going on. You look at some of the videos that are coming out from these candidates, from these political parties, and what you see are CVs of violence against Palestinians presented to voters, whether that's in Gaza, whether it's against Palestinian prisoners, detainees, and the forcibly disappeared, and how the fact that they're not eating well, the fact that they're being mistreated. This is a video that was just released by the Israeli Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, or whether it is fighting Palestinian presence, demolishing homes, and setting up hundreds of settlements and outposts, like the campaign launched by Bezalel Smotrich, who is in charge of that effort, officially and ideologically.
How does it work, Noor? I mean, we have a situation where suddenly there's an outpost created, which is illegal technically under Israeli law, and then those outposts get bigger, and then they're gradually legalized by the Israeli judiciary, and then they grow into even bigger settlements, which then create further outposts. So it's a whole creeping takeover of the West Bank. Is that how it works?
Well, it used to work like that, but under this government, nobody now dares to call any settlement illegal. Because the policy of the Israeli government is to set up outposts, is to allow these so-called pastoral outposts to be set up on the hilltops of the occupied West Bank. So what you see right now are expedited efforts to entrench those outposts, to provide them with security, to provide them with water, with electricity and protection, and even financial aid. There is no longer even a rhetorical debate about whether this is right to set it up in this location or the other. And you have ministers boasting about the numbers of outposts, because as they argue publicly, this is the best way to take over the most amount of land. You have a handful of settlers with one or two caravans. Sometimes they start out as tents. They have a herd of sheep or a herd of cows, and with those cows and sheep, they can take over an entire mountain. That is what is being shared publicly in Israel as a strategy to take over the occupied West Bank and to keep Palestinians confined to larger populated areas where there are gates installed, about 1,000 of them, along with checkpoints where they can be confined and kept so that the settlers can take over the rest of the land.
Just want to remind our viewers about these pictures that you are seeing at the moment. This is really breaking news coming from the occupied West Bank. Dozens of settlers, protected by Israeli forces, attacked Palestinian residents in the fields of a village just northeast of Ramallah and fired tear gas at them while they were plying the land. And Noor is still with us. And Noor, I mean, this is just getting worse on a daily basis, is it not?
It really is. And moving from one place to another in the West Bank is a daunting task. If it is not urgent, people try to avoid it, because you have to think of the checkpoints. You have to think of whether you will make it in time if you have an appointment. You have to factor in all those delays. So a trip that usually takes an hour can now take up to 3, 4, 5 hours. That costs more money and it costs more time, but it also could cost you your life or safety, because Israeli settlers are also on the road, and there is no telling what they can do. What this does also is change the way of life of Palestinians, because when farmers can't get to their land. They're no longer farmers. They are now poor, unemployed Palestinians who will need financial assistance, who will need food assistance, who are now food insecure. And in the context of a shrinking economy, and a Palestinian economy that has been kneecapped by other Israeli policies, these farmers find absolutely no help. And so you get to a situation where the social fabric, the economic composition of those communities is completely altered, and there is very little that the community can do to help those affected, to help those who cannot farm or cannot access their land or cannot get to their job and are then let go if they work in a town or city that is beyond the limits of their own community. So this has a domino effect that is difficult to quantify because it really affects everything. It affects all ways of life. And we are in summer break. Schools will be opening at the end of this month. On top of everything we're talking about, in a few weeks, we're going to see school children having to walk to their school and having to endure or calculate all of the things that we're talking about now. The checkpoints, the gates, the Israeli settler violence, all of that will now be part of their daily routine as well.
Noor, I mean, we also had the Israeli authorities issuing a tender for something like 627 new housing units in Kochav Yaakov settlement on the occupied West Bank. Apparently, this project is going to be built on land in Ramallah itself, is it not? And the Al-Birhe governorate. Tell us a bit about this.
That's right. Well, part of the strategy of the Israeli government, as it has been declared by Bezalel Smotrich, is to not recognize those divisions or those classifications of land in the West Bank. So it's not just Area C anymore, 60% of the occupied West Bank that is under complete Israeli security and civilian control. It's also Area B and A, which is where Palestinian towns and cities are. And we have seen in the past month or so, the Israeli government sanction the expansion of existing settlements and the establishment of new ones on Palestinian land where there are Palestinian communities. And so what you will have is Israeli settlers living literally in the midst or at the doorstep of Palestinians, and that will undoubtedly result in scenes like the ones we're seeing in Al-Mghayr and in other areas where Palestinians will be faced with a choice between their security and the security of their children and staying in their homes on their lands. And this may result in people leaving their homes because they simply cannot sustain a life that is under the mercy of the Israeli settlers who have taken it over with government sanctioning.
No, give us an idea of just how difficult it is to travel from one part of the occupied West Bank to another.
Well, let me summarize it to you this way. There are groups on WhatsApp and other applications where people tell others what is the situation of the roads like where they live. So before you head out of your city, before you head out of Ramallah, you check those groups. You see what the situation is of the checkpoint right outside, right at the gates of Ramallah to see if you can leave that city. And then, depending on where your destination is, you have to check whether the Israeli military gates and checkpoints leading up to that, it could be 5, it could be 10 gates and checkpoints leading to your destination, if they're open or not. And that situation changes all the time. So you could be halfway through only to realize that getting to where you need to go is no longer possible. And you also have to keep a lookout for Israeli settlers who could be coming down the hill, who could be throwing stones, who could be setting up their own checkpoints. You have to worry about that because there's no one you can call if that happens. If you're attacked by an Israeli settlers, there is no one who can come to your aid because the Israeli army is there to protect the settlers. If you defend yourself, you are likely to be at the very least, detained by Israeli soldiers who are never too far from those settlers. So that's the kind of mindset that you have to be in. You have to be ready to risk.
Noor?
You have to be ready for the delays.
And Noor, do some of these soldiers actually live with the settlers?
Absolutely. There is a disproportionate number of Israeli settlers who now wear the uniform of the army, and they, you see them off uniform attacking with the settlers sometimes, as we've heard from many eyewitnesses in Palestinian villages, and then they put on the uniform. There are units that have been set up, so-called security units, set up by Itamar Ben-Gvir for the protection of Israeli settlers. These are people who have government-issued weapons to protect these settlers. They are settlers themselves. They are not accountable to anyone except Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wants them to fire at will. So there is no law and order component to this. There is no path to justice or legal recourse in this context. And also, Palestinians are forbidden to, for example, sue for damages. They can't go to an Israeli court and ask for compensation when Israeli settlers burn their home, burn their businesses, or bar them from accessing it, like we saw, for example, yesterday in Al-Taibi. There's a cement factory, and the owner hasn't been able to get to that factory to operate it, to make money and to keep his employees paid for some time because the Israeli settlers have made it inaccessible. He can't sue for that. He can't be compensated for that. He has to take in the losses.
Now, Taibi is actually a Christian village, is it not? It's one of the biggest ones on the occupied West Bank. So it's actually just blanket in terms of the way this is being carried out.
Taibi is a historical Palestinian Christian town, very important for Palestinian heritage, but also for Christian heritage. It is believed in the Christian tradition that this was where Jesus stopped on his way to Jerusalem. And right now, that village is shrinking. 1,400 residents, around 20 families have already left because their life with these gates, with these settler attacks, has become unsustainable because they can't expand. There is not a single restaurant left in Taibi because business is unviable. It is a town that is struggling to stay afloat because of what we're talking about, because of more than a dozen Israeli settlements and outposts that are surrounding it, taking over the land and making the rest of it inaccessible. There are large plots of land in Taibi that have not been officially confiscated by the Israeli army, but they've been confiscated by fear of settler attacks, fear of having the crops burned and then making all of that effort and investment go down the drain. And so the land is not planted. The land is not being used, not because people don't want to use it, but because they simply can't. And that opens them up to the confiscation by the Israeli army under the excuse that that land is not cultivated.
Noor, thank you so much. Noor Odeh there joining us live from Ramallah on the occupied West Bank. Well, we can stay in the occupied West Bank, joined by journalist Sarah Abu Al-Rob, live from Nablus. We've got reported movements by the Israeli military of them moving into Nablus. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, hours after invading the village of Tel and demolishing the house of Farouk, a 3-floor house, arresting Palestinians and attacking Palestinian houses, the Israeli military this morning withdrew from Tel and moved to Nablus. Currently, the situation is that there is a number of Israeli military vehicles located in Al-Makfiya neighborhood. It's a residential area to the southwest of Nablus. No further information about the situation. Why they are here? They might be coming for arresting someone, or they could be coming for invading or raiding a house. But currently, what we know that the Israeli military, a number of Israeli vehicles are located in the southwest neighborhood of Nablus, Al-Makfiya neighborhood.
Yeah, and of course, they have all these 600 plus settlements which are likely to be built in Nablus itself. Is it connected?
Of course, the Israeli military raids are, in addition to the continuous and daily Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians in Nablus and in many other cities, both of them have the same goal, to force Palestinians to move out, especially from areas B and C that are supposed to be under the Israeli military, to condense as much as possible of Palestinians in the cities, which are supposed to be also under Palestinian Authority control. However, the Israeli military and the Israeli settlers are able to raid, attack, and invade the cities, whether it's in Nablus or in other cities.
All right, thank you for joining us on Just Say No. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and keep watching. We really appreciate it. Keep protesting, keep fighting fascism and genocide and murder. Stop giving money and weapons to Israel. We, the American people, have to recapture our democracy and make our leaders live in the same realm we live in, and to follow constitutional law, which is what this country is all about, and which is the foundation of real democracy, which is what we want. Democracy, justice, human rights, and equal rights for all individuals.
Puppets of the IDF and the Israeli government. They peddle the same words, the same propaganda. They use all the same phrases.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you. Just say no. All right, thank you for joining me on Just Say No and the Electronic Intifada. Have a good evening. Thank you.
He's all of 31 and he's only 17. He's been a soldier for 1,000 years. He's a Catholic.
All right, keep watching. Just Say No.